Hello everybody, and thank you. What a warm welcome and what a fantastic turnout. We are absolutely, utterly honoured. We've both been up the scaffold today, so we're feeling a little bit scruffy. You all look so wonderful, and we've been to the most beautiful shop, the converter shop, and seen the most beautiful clothes today, so that hasn't helped at all, because they were stunning, but absolutely outside my price bracket. So thank you everybody. This is the end of our journey. We've been travelling for about 17 days, first Singapore, then Hong Kong, and then Bangkok, and now we're here. We fly back in the morning, and it feels like we've been away for months. We've taken in so much knowledge and information. Hopefully we can share some information as well. And we see this as just the start of the journey really, so please, if there's an opportunity to keep talking to us. I've got a stack of business cards here which I'll leave on, and if anyone wants to pick one up at the end, it's the way to contact both Lee and I. So I'm going to hand over to Lee. He's going to start the presentation, talk about his experience, then I'll talk about the research project, and then Lee will conclude. Thank you everybody.
Oh, technical issue straight away. Hello everyone. No, as Laura said, it's just an incredible experience. I feel like I'm in some sort of surreal Salvador Dali dream at the moment. So I never believed as a stonemason that I would be talking in Mumbai, especially to such a group of knowledgeable people. And it's already, I can see, I've only been here for 2 days, but I can feel like I've got many friends already. So York Minster dates from 1225 to 1472 and is built in a variety of Gothic styles. It is built from locally quarried magnesium limestone, which is still used to repair its fabric today. It is the largest Gothic building in Britain and has archaeological remains spanning back to the Romans. The Minster houses the largest collection of medieval stained glass in Britain, whilst the building's principal function is a place of worship and learning. The building also draws in around 1 million visitors a year, and it is often said the history of York Minster is the history of England. In 1989, I began a 4-year apprenticeship at York Minster under the guidance of Geoffrey Butler, the master carver. The training I received from Jeff is probably the most valuable time of my career. Jeff not only taught me how to carve, he also taught me to look at the building for inspiration and reference. He also taught me what I believe is the most important aspect of conservation, the passing on of knowledge and craft to the next generation. In my case, Jeff told me that he was trained by Hubie, who was taught by York's most famous carver, George Milby, who has a blue plaque in York at the moment. After the apprenticeship, I spent 10 years carving stones for the Minster. Here are a picture of a few carvings I produced in that time. Some stones could take up to 2 months, others would be repeated multiple times. Through the process, I started to think of the stones as mirrors. To me, the weathered stones reflected the past, which I use in the present to carve new reflections for future generations of carvers. This is the most important part of the job, passing on the original design. During this period, the major project was the restoration of the Great West Doorway. The restoration of the 13th century doorway of the Minster remains a turning point in my career and outlook as a carver. Much to my dismay, the decision was made to completely replace the 13th century carved doorway. The decision was also made that the new figurative carving would be sculpted in a modern dynamic line rather than copying the original Gothic. The principal justification for replacement was to preserve what remained of the original doorway inside the building, whilst the restoration would allow the main doorway into the Minster to be open to the public without the fear of loose stone dropping on them. To this end, a sculptor named Rory Young was commissioned to produce a new Genesis cycle. For 2 years, 7 carvers and 10 masons worked on the doorway and produced new carvings of incredible beauty. This is probably the best carving I have ever produced for the Minster. However, I was very unhappy about the total replacement of the doorway. I had been taught that later restorations are much part of the history of the Minster as the original stones. The original stones, although safely stored in the crypts, can no longer be seen by the public, so to me the stone mirrors could no longer reflect their design to future generations. My feelings were so strong that for many years afterwards I avoided going to the west end of the Minster. However, it was Rory Young, the sculptor of the new Genesis site, that gave me a craft lifeline. He spoke to me about the line method, and that if he would have been given the choice, he would have actually repaired rather than replaced the stones. After attending Rory's lecture on the use of lime, I decided to seek more information on conservation courses, which led to me embarking on the William Morris Craft Fellowship in the year 2000. For 9 months, I travelled around Britain visiting historical sites where I would be taught new craft skills and the SPAB's philosophy of repair. The SPAB is the Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings. I learned about the importance of debate and the concepts of minimal intervention and honest repair. However, as I absorbed thinking, I was distant from my chosen craft of carving. By the time I returned to the Minster, I decided that the only way to reconcile my conflicts was to base my time using the lime method. The lime method repairs stonework using lime mortar, sand and stone dust. Here is an example of some lime work on damaged buttress canopies of the Minster. You can see before and after repairs. On the slide on the left, the black sulphation was cleaned by hand, whilst the pockets of decay were cut out and consolidated with colour-matched lime mortar. The final part of the lime method is to apply a lime shelter coat, which is a mixture of sand and stone dusts. The lime acts as a sacrificial skin to absorb salts and air pollution, whilst visually restoring the stone. As well as mortar repairs, it is common for decorative stones to require pinning where cracks or faults threaten the integrity of the stone. Here the canopy is prepared for pinning and mortar repairs. Holes are drilled out and threaded stainless steel or basalt rods are fed in and anchored using a hydraulic line or resin. Ceramic T-bars are also used to anchor substantial mortar repairs. After repair, a sheet recording all of interventions is made. This is perhaps the most important part of the process, as it will help to inform future conservators how the stone was repaired. If the repairs are successful, they can be repeated. In 2003, I was appointed the Minster's conservator and was asked if I would like to study an MA in conservation studies at the University of York. Although I was anxious about the shift into academic studies, I took up the challenge and successfully completed the degree with distinction in 2005. Throughout the course, I revisited my past conflicts and found much resolve in the process. Importantly, I was able to question both aspects of my earlier training and developed a greater understanding of the importance of defining the history and significance of a building. Many people think conservation is about keeping everything with practical solutions. However, I've come to understand that the practical solutions are just the final elements of an informed process. My time at King's Manor gave me new tools, research, recording and conservation charters, and perhaps more importantly, a network of friends from around the world. With the new tools of heritage charters, I refaced the reflection of the west doorway. At the opposite end of the Minster was the great east window surmounted by a set of carvings in a similar state of decay to those of the west doorway. The east window is the largest expanse of medieval stained glass in Northern Europe and is often referred to as the English masterpiece. The glass painted by John Thornton between 1405 and 1408 is a depiction of the Bible from beginning to end. At the top of the window, God is painted holding a book with Alpha and Omega written on it. Alpha and Omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. This symbolises that God is the beginning and end of all things. Understandably, at the time, much significance and research was placed on the glazing. However, little was understood about the stone-carved voussoirs and seated figure surmounting it. So as part of my MA at King's Manor, I wrote a dissertation on the meaning of the east front. However, with little information to go on, I can remember thinking, how on earth is a simple stone carver like me going to work out what the carvings represent? However, I found the answer in the Borough Charter. There's a recommendation to research associated meanings of the place to define significance and values. So after many days reading the Bible and studying the carvings and stained glass of European cathedrals, the research evolved into one which revealed the iconography of the stone and glass was linked. The carvings are part of a Jesse tree, which is the medieval depiction of Christ's royal ancestors, the kings of Judah. The foliage carving beneath the figures represents the black branches of the Jesse tree, all of which grow into the coronation of the Virgin by Christ in the apex. Beneath which, in the glass, is the image of God holding the book with Alpha and Omega. The research led to an acknowledgement that the stones are of international significance. This definition of significance led to a change in repair philosophy, which reduced replacement stone by 2/3. Here we have a video of the east window, so we can see the kings of Judah moving up on either side. Then we've got God in the top of the window with the coronation of the Virgin, and then surmounting it, there is a depiction of St. Peter. To the medieval mind, this was a portal for their souls to enter the gates of heaven. St. Peter sitting above with the keys. For me, it reconciled my conflict with the west doorway, and I was able to carve again. So in the centre, there's my carving of King Uzziah, who is one of the kings of Judah. From the research, this is basically my dissertation in stone. The figure and size is influenced by the stained glass of the east window, whilst the king holds the lion mask motif, which is the symbol of the kings.
Just excuse me for a minute, I've just got to change to another presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. That's the 4th time I've seen that part of the presentation, and actually, I don't think Lee realises the impact he's had on York Minster. It's phenomenal, some of those carvings that you've done. I really think it's amazing. And continues to have as well. So, as with any historic heritage building, we have a number of challenges that we face, and we've summarised these in 3 areas, so financial, environmental, and heritage skills. And I'm just going to give you a snapshot of the kind of things that we're talking about. So, from a financial perspective, it costs around about £30,000. I did a quick conversion, so I hope I've got this right, but around about 3 million rupees a day to run and care for York Minster. So every day we're looking for that kind of financial funding to run the Minster. We get no government funding and there's no Central Church of England support. So the majority of the income does come from paying visitors. In 2019 we received 750,000 visitors, and at the time the director that I worked for, he said it would only take an international incident for the number of visitors to drop and for the chapter of York to start questioning costs, and one of the highest costs is the stone yard. The following year we had COVID, and I said to him, have you got a crystal ball? How on earth could you have known that something like that was going to happen? So you see our numbers dropped to around about 200,000, and really that's only the first few months of the year while we were able to accept people in. So as with many places, an absolute catastrophic loss on our income. So the Minster knew that they needed to find a more sustainable business model, so they weren't just reliant on people walking through the door and buying a ticket. How could they use the other facilities and buildings and land that they have around the Minster? And also just to summarise some of the costs ongoing in terms of working on the fabric of the Minster. So our 5-year fabric costs are around about £11 million, and we have capital project costs of £14.5 million. So they're on top of the £30,000 every day that we're trying to find. So we're talking about really considerable numbers. From an environmental perspective, we are seeing increasing rainfall, which for the last few days, especially in Bangkok, would have been quite nice actually because it's been so hot. But we're seeing increasing volumes of rainfall, and as you can see from some of these pictures, it's causing drastic stone erosion. Lee's probably a better one to talk about this, but it's really eating into the stone and creating pockets, and then we're seeing issues like this. So there's an ongoing project to work around the Minster. The scaffolding might go up in an area for roughly about 10 years, and at that point that scaffolding goes up, they're actually making a decision if they need to do an intervention within the next 100 years, because it will likely be 100 years before they return to that area. So it's a constant ongoing project that they're tackling. Obviously with environmental damage, it's becoming a problem that's happening quicker, so they need to get around the building quicker. And then the third is heritage craft skills. So there's 42 Anglican cathedrals in England. We have our own stone yard at York Minster. Only 10 others have their own stone yard. It was 10 in total, there's now 11. One of the smaller ones has just recently reopened, which is nice to see. But all the others have just become too high cost to run. So the cost has been challenged, they've been closed, and the work has been given to an external contractor. So these stone yards do try and talk together and work together, but it's clear that there's a trend there of them closing, and we really want to look at how we could make sure that that didn't happen at York. It's not a risk at the moment, but with less income, with increasing amounts of work doing, it's going to come on the agenda sooner than people would like. So there's a real shortage of trained craftspeople in the UK, and we really want to make sure that these, not only the building is sustained, but the craft skills are sustained, that we don't lose them for future generations, and that we continue to knowledge transfer not only into the teams but into the wider public, and maybe inspire future generations to come and become stonemasons or glaziers. So our own facilities are quite constrained. Has anybody actually been to York and seen York Minster? A couple of people, yes. So we do have an outside area where if you do come, you may see the masons work in the lodge, but actually we have a separate stone yard that's tucked away down a side street, and in there we have a very old 4-axis saw, which is about 50 years old, and a workshop for our masons to work. We knew we wanted to invest in supplementing the hand skills with technology. We just didn't have the space. So with everything that's been happening, it's come together really as two projects, and actually said, we've got this precinct, how can we use it better, and how can we also make it work for the craft skills of the future? Nobody wanted to come away from the Minster and set up a workshop, say outside York, and remove the craft people from their inspiration. So we had to try and look at a way to keep it side by side with the building itself. We also have a programme of installing protective glazing on our medieval stained glass. So we were just talking earlier that you have a friend who is, gosh, the great, how many great granddaughter?
Since the 16th century to now.
Yes.
16th, 17th century.
Of Sir John Fairfax.
Sir John
Fairfax's descendant. So John Fairfax, in the Civil War, he actually protected York Minster's glass. So when many other buildings were ransacked and the glass was smashed, he actually protected the glass, which is why we have the largest collection of medieval stained glass in the world. So please pass it on. Thanks, Sean. Yeah. So we're now trying to protect this glass from the conditions that we're seeing, the weather, increasing issues causing more problems. So we want to try and put protective glazing on, and if you come to York Minster, you'll see the windows that have already got the protective glazing on. This was initially a 10 to 20 year programme, but every time they come up to the window, the glaziers know what they're going to deal with. The glass is fairly consistent, but when the stonemasons come to look at the stone that surrounds the glass, it's actually becoming in worse and worse repair. So whereas the glass will be ready to go back in, it's taking longer to conserve, or if it has to be replaced, the stone. So what was a 10 to 20 year programme is more like a 30-year programme at current pace, and it's just not sustainable. The cost of it, the time factor, the environmental damage. So all these three things have come together to form a real need to look with fresh eyes at this. So I actually report into York Minster Fund. The fund was set up in the 1960s You saw from the video at the start, York Minster's got a central tower, 197 feet high, 25,000 tonnes in weight. In the survey in 1967, it was found it was actually sinking. It was gradually sinking under its own weight because the foundations were quite poor. And so the chapter of York were not spending enough money on the fabric, and there wasn't a pot there to deal with this issue that potentially could have been catastrophic if it collapsed. So York Minster Fund was set up by prominent business people in the York area. They raised the funds to underpin the tower, and if you do come to York, please go into the Undercroft. There's a little museum, and you can actually see the engineering works under there where they've pinned underneath the tower to support it. And I think it was actually during that process they found out that there was a Roman church, a Roman fortress underneath. There's a big Roman column that was found, so it was actually quite fortuitous of the history that revealed. And then for the next 50 years, the fund has continued to raise money for York Minster. It provides about £1 million every year, which goes towards the fabric, conservation and restoration, so mainly stone and glass. They've recently supported a full renovation of the organ, and they do also support to a degree on learning and on visitor economy. So I'm actually a manufacturing engineer, as you said at the start. You're there, thank you. And so manufacturing engineer, worked at JCB, who set up her own business as a consultant. What on earth am I doing at York Minster? But the director of York Minster Fund is also an engineer. And he came in and looked at the workshop and looked at a piece of quite simple stone that was being masoned on a banker and asked roughly how much it cost and did the maths in his head and thought that one piece of stone is costing around about £3,000. So if a donor was to come and say, I'd love to donate £3,000 to York Minster, if we actually told them that was one stone, they'd probably be quite shocked. And he thought there must be a way that we can move this forward without losing the craft skills. So I knew Richard Shaw, and he asked me if I would come in. The first thing I said is, I know nothing about stone, glass or heritage. And he said, perfect. I just want complete fresh eyes to look at the processes and just have a question in mind to see if there's an opportunity there. And all he said to me is, you've got 2 years, see what you need to see, do what you need to do, go where you need to go. And if by the end of the 2 years, the best you've achieved is that they've lifted the head up and looked out into the world and looked for other opportunities, then I'm happy. That's all I want from you. So the objectives of the project was to establish best practice. So I've spent quite a lot of time in the workshops with the teams, gaining their trust and building some rapport, understanding the problems, understanding their ideas, and then starting to go out into the world and see what other people were doing. So looking at new techniques and new technologies, looking at how we could bring new skills into the current team. So never at any point was it we're going to actually reduce numbers and bring technology in to replace people. It was, we've got this skill base, what can we do to bring the 30-year programme back on track and also bring new skills into the team. So we currently train an apprentice every year. Sometimes we take 2 on it each year. It's a 4-year apprenticeship. And actually not all of them have a job at the end of that. There's only so many that we can keep long term. And if they were to leave York Minster and go into the world of stonemasonry in a commercial company, they're not prepared for that. It's all traditional hand tools, hammer and chisels. They don't use air tools, they don't use grinders. So to go into a commercial company, they wouldn't have the skills required, and that felt that we weren't supporting them correctly for their future career. So it's how we could enhance their skills to increase the volume of conservation. I've talked about that. So we looked at 4 main areas. I'm mainly going to talk about the first 2, which is measurement and documentation and cutting technology. So in terms of knowledge sharing, this is now a 5-year project. It was a 2-year project, and I've built up some really good connections with 4 particular cathedrals. So Washington National Cathedral in America, the Duomo in Milan in Italy, Cologne Cathedral in Germany, and Nidaros Cathedral in Norway. And they've become really good friends now. We are constantly communicating, meeting up in conferences and knowledge sharing. And they're even talking about coming to York when we open our Centre of Excellence next year. So it's really nice to see that that relationship is really embedding. And then we've also been to a number of conferences and exhibitions. So Marmamac is the biggest stone fair in the world, which is in Italy, in Verona. If you ever got a chance to go, it's absolutely amazing. It's really worth attending. Denkmal is a heritage conference, which is in an exhibition which is in Germany. And from attending that, they actually invited me to go to Shanghai and present about the York Minster project in 2019. And then I've included Advanced Engineering and UK Construction Week, which are both very sector-specific exhibitions. And we're actually taking 4 apprentices to the Advanced Engineering show in a couple of months. They may not see anything that's relevant, but the idea is to just get them to look outside the box and not think about necessarily just working in a stone workshop. What else is happening in the world and what could be applied back to this sector? And I said we quite a lot there because I'm a huge believer that you don't do change to people, you do it with them. So all the places that I've visited, I've tried to take somebody from the stone or glass team with me. So Lee will talk later about some of the trips that he's been on and the things that we've seen. So I wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we've actually implemented. So at the Marmamac show in Italy, we came across a product called the ProLiner. So this image at the bottom right is the stained glass conservators actually taking measurements of tracery windows in a very traditional way that they've used for decades of pushing the paper into the aperture and actually capturing even the movement that's happened within the window, capturing a true likeness of the window outline. And then they used that, they converted it onto a board, and then they used that to reframe the medieval glass and to do the new framing of the protective glass. And even when they showed me what they do, and they even said there must be a better way of doing this, Laura. So we didn't know about ProLiner, we stumbled upon it, just happening to go to an exhibition. And it's actually used, if you look at the top picture, it's used for measuring worktops, stone worktops, for cutting the shape to match a kitchen. And it's basically a stylus on a cord, and they can take it up onto the scaffold, they can touch on an area of stone, click a button, and the next one take multiple points and then join them up. And the bottom left corner is a template that they've actually taken. And to give you an idea of the kind of improvements that this has brought, on a typical 25 tracery panel window, it would have taken them around 10 days to template it, and they're now saying that they can do that in roughly about 2 days. So we're seeing about an 80% saving. So really significant, seem to really like it. And we've got one for the stonemasons, they're starting to use it a bit more now as well. We went to Nidaros Cathedral in Norway, as I mentioned, and they were using photogrammetry. So the masons were taking photographs, like Lee was showing some of the recording that they did when they did the Greatest Window. They were taking photographs and adding them in, but they weren't actually being able to capture 3D images. And I will talk about scanning. We looked at scanning, but it was a huge step from picking up a camera and taking a photograph to suddenly having a 3D scanner in your hand. So photogrammetry was a really nice introduction into 3D, and we've now implemented this. We've bought a better camera, we've implemented the software, and the masons are using it where it's applicable since 2021. So since 2019, we've looked at 3D scanning, we've tried it on stone and glass. We haven't found a way yet for it to work for glass. Because of the reflective nature, it doesn't capture it properly. And we have come across since sprays, but I don't think Sarah Brown at York Glazes Trust will be too happy about me spraying these sprays on her medieval glass, so we haven't tackled that yet. But we've actually implemented a Creaform Go scan in 2022. This is a scan of one of the medieval grotesques up on the scaffold. And as I said before, this isn't a tool that sits separate to the teams. Every mason has now been trained to use this technology, so they can, when it's appropriate, they can come and get the technology and take it on the scaffold, and they can capture what they're seeing. And I think this is really interesting because as it comes around, you can see just here, I think it looks like a face here, which you wouldn't normally pick up and see just by visually seeing it. You see new things through the scanning. In 2019, we started looking at cutting technology, and Lee and I went to Italy to work with a stone cutting machine manufacturer that produces 5-axis CNC, so computer numerical control machines in Italy, called Breton, and we trialled 2 different pieces and 2 different approaches. So the voussoir was trialled from using 2D CAD templates. So just to go through some of these numbers, by hand, a piece of stone that would take around about 4 days. It took 2 hours to program the technology. It took 4 hours to machine it, and it still took 2 days to hand finish. And that's because the decision was made to leave 2 millimetres of stone material all over the piece. And at the time, we were working with a stone yard in South Wales who said to me, "One day, Laura, you'll get to 0.5 mil." And I thought, I've got to 2 mil. That was hard enough to get to that, so I can't ever imagine getting to 0.5 mil. But from just taking it to 2 mil, we still saw a 30% saving. And over a set of 52 of these in a window, you would see around about 75 days saving. So we're talking significant numbers. The finials are always in sets of 3. This was taken from a weathered one, so it's not something we could 3D scan and reproduce with technology. Mason had to do the first one completely by hand, and it took 29 days. We were then able to 3D scan it. It took 2 days to input into the CNC machine, 2 days to machine it again to 2 mil, and still 16 days to hand finish it. But that still gave us a 30% saving. And on the third one, we wouldn't have to do those 2 days programming again. It's already in. So overall, it worked out around about a 20-day saving. So we've gone from doing that in 2019 to actually investing £650,000 in cutting technology. We are building new facilities, which I'll share some images, and these will be commissioned in early 2024. We've got quite a lot of capacity, so we've predicted on these numbers what we can do at York Minster, but we're going to be able to offer this technology also to other heritage sites, other cathedrals who don't necessarily have the financial ability to purchase this kind of equipment. So this is a Breton Contour 5, which is a milling machine, and it's got the largest Z-axis available, which is quite considerate in the UK. Most stone yards would not have this size machine. We could potentially put multiple pieces of stone on this bed at any one time. And then the second one is a Breton Speed X, which works more from a blade, so for taking pieces away. So we could put a piece of stone on this machine first, take sections away, and then move it onto the milling machine. Or we could take it straight off this and give it straight to a stonemason. It's a balancing act all the way through. There'll be some pieces that we won't put anywhere near technology, because especially if they're a one-off, it will be quicker for a mason to do completely by hand from scratch. And we don't also want to obviously lose those hand skills. It's a really important part. And then we've also invested in something called an MD Dario. This is another Italian manufacturer, and this is an articulated wire saw. And part of the Centre of Excellence is about education. And again, like I said with the digital, to go from a camera straight to 3D scanning was a huge jump. To go from hand tools to a 5-axis CNC machine is a huge jump. And Lee and I really like this because it can follow a template, or you can freestyle on it. It works on this articulated arm, it can tilt, and it's still a hand-operated tool. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried windsurfing, but it's very much how you would move a windsurfing sail with this bar that goes across. We've also been looking at the traditional casting process. So this was a weathered medieval grotesque. Its head had actually been broken off. We still had the head. And Lee went through a traditional casting process, which is very invasive, pushing material onto the weathered stone to create the shape, which can then be transferred to create a mould. And then we pour a gypsum a replacement of it, a replica of it. So this is a 7-day process, and like I say, very invasive. So we questioned, is there a better way to do this? We looked at using 3D scanning. So the only invasive part of it is putting the dots on for the 3D scan, which are easily removable. We were able to scan the two pieces independently, bring them together digitally, but we still wanted to create the replica. So I found polyurethane material, which is used in car manufacturing. It's used for modelling of new designs, and we tried different grades, and we found a grade that would work on the CNC machines, but it would also hold clay and plaster on its surface without falling off as it dried out. So it sounded like a really good opportunity. So we did some trials, and this was roughly about a 4-day process. So again, around about 40% saving and non-invasive to the weathered grotesque. So side by side, Lee's holding the polyurethane on the scaffold side by side with the stone. You can see it's a really good replica. And then we passed this polyurethane model across to an apprentice mason who'd never done a grotesque before. And it can be quite daunting. Suddenly you're replacing something, 800 years old potentially, and they still need to keep the lines and the shapes, because although he's working on it up close, he's got to think about what it's going to look like when people are viewing it from ground level. So to be able to have this model and build on top of it, he had the basic shape of where arms were and where shoulders were, but he could embellish it then to what he wanted, and this is what he created. So like I say, you can see that the general shape is very much there, and that's waiting to go on the Minster. It's sat on the ground level at the moment. So the Centre of Excellence, this has come about by all these different factors that I've talked about, the financial issues we face, environmental, the need to look at a new location for technology, and also about preserving the craft skills as well. So you can see York Minster in the centre there, and there's 2 areas highlighted red, which is almost going to be like a campus facility. We've gone through planning permission, it's all approved, the finances are approved. By the time we get back up for the contractor will have been selected, and then they'll start dismantling the current Stoneyard building, and these 2 new buildings are going up together, ready for opening in Q2 of 2024. So if you are thinking of coming to York, please arrange to come maybe when it's open, because then we can show you the new facilities as well as the Minster. So the first one is called the Heritage Quad. So for those who have been to York, you'll have seen the city walls that go all the way around the city centre. This will be sat just under the city walls. So this is an image looking down from the city walls. So general public will be able to see the masons working in a traditional way with hand tools on the bankers, but still have that view up towards the Minster and the inspiration for this whole project. It's an £8.5 million project which has been funded completely by York Minster Fund, and I've got a little video that I'm trying to put on for you. So this is a video that our architects Tonkin Luke, who are based in London, have put together. It's got some nice atmospheric bird tweeting and stone chipping. But this is looking at the Heritage Quad. We've really thought about the aesthetics because of its placement in such close placement towards the York Minster that we really had to think about how it looked and how it performed. So it goes from this beautiful courtyard area, and then this area that you're seeing on the right, which you'll get a better glimpse of as it comes around the corner, is actually going to be accommodation for 6 people, so 6 separate bedrooms with bathrooms, and then a shared area for kitchen and living facilities with a beautiful garden. Accommodation in York City Centre is really expensive, and we want to encourage younger people into this profession. So we're going to provide accommodation for our 1st and 2nd year apprentices, but also we'll have 2 spare accommodation for visiting apprentices. And the idea is to be able to set up exchanges with the partners that, especially the 4 that we've created a deeper connection with, even if it's just a short-term week to 2 week. The knowledge that they'll bring and experience that our masons will get to learn from, and also the experience that they will have in their time at York, I think will be just invaluable. So this is the banker workshop. We've got a crane overhead, and this is representative of 15 bankers for the masons to work at. And I think when I came in, there was quite a lot of nervousness. I'm a consultant, and I go in anywhere, and you talk about change, and people get really worried and think their job is going. And I think seeing this has really helped for the masons to see that actually they're going nowhere. There's true investment in their long-term careers and the craft skills at York Minster. And then there's all the time there's this glimpse, this look up towards the Minster for the inspiration. I'm just going to come off that. This is a view from the top. It looks beautiful, and we've got solar panels sat down to the left-hand side there, and water harvesting. And then, like I said, the accommodation for exchange visits and apprentices. And then the other site is the Technology and Works Hub, So this is the current location, this is where the masons currently work. This will be completely covered in solar panels and also have water collection, so trying to be as self-sufficient as possible. And this will house the 2 big new saws, and any other cutting and digital technology will sit within this facility. So we're at the point now where everything's been planned, everything is paid for, it all needs to be executed. And whilst this process has been ongoing, we also had the additional pressure of creating a statue of Queen Elizabeth II to commemorate the Platinum Jubilee. It was commissioned back in 2020, and it was given to one of our own carver masons, Richard Bossons, to do this beautiful statue. So it should have been unveiled in September 2022 in the Platinum Jubilee year, and sadly Queen Elizabeth died within 2 weeks of us about to unveil this. So all the plans were obviously stopped out of respect, and King Charles III came in November 2022 to unveil it. You may have seen, I think it was probably on international news, it was a really big event. It was the first statue to be unveiled since her passing. But for us, not only is it a beautiful and significant piece, but it's actually a real interplay of craft and technology. And we've celebrated that, so we've got a display within the Minster that will be there for a year that showcases how we've created this statue and how it's not just been a traditional approach, it has got technology fully embedded into the process, and it's become our vision for the Centre of Excellence and how we envisage we're going to work in the future. So I've got some images to show you of the creation. So this was Richard's clay model that he created at the start. So pure craft, creative hand tools, traditional materials. We then took that and it was 3D scanned, and it gives you an idea of the size of that. So using that 3D scan, it was taken to its full size, which was just under 7 foot. I said 7 meters then, that would have been big. Just under 7 foot. And using the polyurethane material, we were able to recreate it on the 5-axis CNC. So the intention was never to do a good finish with this, it was just to get a rough representative of the size and shape. But because the material's a lot lighter, it allowed it to be lifted up into the niche, and at that point it could be checked for sizing, for framing within the niche, for how it sat, at different angles and viewed from below. So that was a real sort of turning point, because then Richard was able to use this polyurethane as the previous mason had done to build on top of. He didn't have to then start from scratch on a full-size model. He had the base there. He could work it with his tools, and he could add clay and plaster on top of it. And so he was really able to spend additional time on the final finish, which is absolutely beautiful. That is the polyurethane model with clay and plaster on top of it. And Richard is there in the picture, he's actually 3D scanning it. Now Richard is Mr. Anti-Technology, is probably a good way to say it. He was, of all the masons, he's probably the one who did not want to engage the most in technology. So he didn't fully scan this. This was me just getting a scanner in his hand so I could get a picture. But we asked him to go and be part of it being cut on CNC technology, at which point he absolutely and utterly refused to have any involvement in it and go to the commercial stone yard that were going to do this for us. And I could not get to the bottom of what the problem was. And when I finally understood, he said, well, you've got the scan, you're just going to plug it in the machine, someone's going to press go, why do I need to be there? And so there was a lack of understanding of what this process actually requires to input into this kind of technology. You have to think like a mason, you have to approach it like a mason. You tell the machine what tool to pick up, how much material to take off, what angle to take it off from. It is a mason who tells that. It's just a bigger tool than the hand tools. So once I explained that, he agreed to go down. And at that point, we did 2 test pieces. So we did a hand. He was a bit nervous about doing the hands, and also a piece of the face. And he said, as we've done with the trials, let's take it to 2 millimeters. And when that was produced, it was actually quite amorphous, because if you think on your face, if 2 millimeters here and 2 millimeters of extra material here, actually in this curve around your nose is much more than 2 mil. So all these reference points were lost for him to be able to take the material off to create the final statue. So he said, can we try it at 1.5 mil? Can we try it at 1 mil? can we try it at £0.5 mil? And at £0.5 mil he said, please can you do all the statue at £0.5 mil? So what a discussion that happened 2 years ago that said one day you'll get to £0.5 mil, and I never ever thought we would get there. We did on the Queen's statue. We also used photogrammetry to record it. So again, all these tools were brought in so we could get a really nice 3D image of the head that he created out of clay and the crown. And then this is a stoneyard that we work with in South Wales. The owner trained with our master mason, so there's a great deal of trust there. And he had the piece of stone which was Lepine from France, and he machined it to Richard's design using the 3D scanning. Richard helped him input it into the technology, and as I said, they cut it to £0.5 mil of material over 3 weeks. Now this machine probably could have done this in a week and a half because it can run overnight, but the owner was so nervous about the importance of this and to have to get another piece of stone from France as well, so he would only run it when he was on site, so that's why it took 3 weeks. You can see him on the right, he keeps coming to check the machine. And then on this, I love this image. So the statue on the right is polyurethane with clay and plaster on top. The statue on the left has come straight off the machine. So you can see there's still, like round the knee, you can see there's some rough areas there. On the back of the neck where they didn't want to go too close and create any weakness, there's additional material there. And then Richard took this piece here and spent probably another 3 months, maybe 3 to 4 months, finishing it by hand. So it's still huge interactions from the mason, but we estimate overall it probably saved around 4 months worth of work. Here is King Charles unveiling the statue, and up close, it's absolutely beautiful. And I was really privileged to actually get the chance to meet him, shake his hand, and bring technology in again. We presented him with a 3D printed model of the statue printed in gypsum. And that's Richard Shaw on the picture, who's the chairman of York Minster Fund, who started this project. So what's next? I keep saying, okay, we're opening a centre of excellence in 2024. You can't stop there. One, because I like working at York Minster and I want to stay as long as possible. But also, if you want to be a true centre of excellence, you have to keep innovating, you have to keep moving forward. So Lee and I had the wonderful opportunity of travelling to Wyoming last year in America, where we met a group of monks who were building a gothic monastery in the Rocky Mountains in the middle of nowhere. They are not stonemasons, they have an architect, they have a structural engineer, but they are doing everything with technology. Not what we would do at York, we would never go to the lengths that they're going, but their priority is to get it built. They have a short period of time where they can actually work on site, so they have invested in as much technology as they can afford, and they are doing all the design work digitally, and they're doing all the cutting on CNC. So we saw this piece of software that they're using where they're doing all the design. Instead of clay, it's basically digital clay, for want of a better word, and they're creating the designs. So coming back from that, Lee really liked it when he saw it. So we've invested in a touchscreen laptop, we've invested in the software, we've passed it to Lee and just said, go play with it and see what you think and tell us what you think. Let's see if this is an opportunity for York Minster. One of our stonemasons came to me and said, I'm doing small repairs within the Minster, and basically that invasive process that I showed you earlier where they're pushing material on and then creating a mould and pouring it in gypsum. She said, I wonder if we could use 3D printing. And she said to me, could we 3D scan a break, 3D scan something that could be a repair, digitally invert it and 3D print a mould and still pour the gypsum. So I took her off to an exhibition on 3D printing in Lyon in France, and there we came across 2 manufacturers who can actually print in stone. So they currently print in sandstone or clay, but we've got one of them currently costing the process of taking our magnesium limestone that York Minster's built in, grinding it up, mixing with a binder to look at whether we could actually 3D print smaller repairs in our own stone, so it's a perfect colour match. So that's really exciting for me, is that project. And then I mentioned the monks in Wyoming. The next problem we're going to have is we're going to produce more stone quicker, but we've still got the same process of fixing it on the Minster. So the bottleneck is going to move to the scaffold. So we're now starting a project, even though the saw's not going to be available for 12 months, we're starting a project now to prepare for that. And I'm working with a different stonemason on looking at how we can fix faster on the stone. So we're shortly going to be going to Nidaros Cathedral again in Norway and seeing how they're working because of the temperatures that they're dealing with. How are they able to do more fixing through the year? This is an image of the scaffolding that we saw in Wyoming, which we were really excited about. It can basically move up and down. These sections can. Now, whereas that wouldn't be perfect for York Minster, it might be perfect for a window of York Minster where we dismantle and rebuild. So we're just constantly interrogating what's out there. And when I said about there's some business cards here, it's completely selfish because in a year's time, if you come across something, I really want you to think, I'm going to email Laura at York Minster. I think she'll really like this. So please take a card, and if you see anything interesting, please do think of us. And our chairman, Richard Shaw, says if we want to be world class, we have to talk to the world. So this is just a snapshot of within York, like York College, York University, York Glaziers Trust. Within the UK, we've then got into Europe. We've got National University of Singapore that we've been talking to for quite a while. And we're here today with you. So we're really trying to expand the boundaries and talk to as many people as possible. I'm travelling to Christchurch in October to see what they're doing there on the cathedral. So it's such an exciting project and we're so pleased to be able to share it with you. So I'm going to hand over to Lee, who's going to do the last part of it, and then we'll be open to any questions at the end.
Hello again. Stop shaking a bit now, so that's good. 2018 brought perhaps the most interesting period of change to the Stone Yard. Richard Shaw, the head of the York Minster Fund, gave a talk in the Stone Yard, and he said the intention of the fund was to research technology to produce new stones and conserve the fabric of York Minster. This raised a number of debates in the Stone Yard, with many masons feeling the craft traditions of using hand tools would be lost. Many masons would argue, what about conserving the arts and craft of stonemasonry? As the Minster's conservator, everyone expected me to be the most vocal in opposition to technology. However, it was my training as a conservator that made me think the opposite, principally the Borough Charter with its approach to managing change. To start the process, I looked up the word technology and what it actually meant, and found with great delight a description of the art and craft of stonemasonry. The word technology comes from two Greek words, techna and logos. Techna means art, skill, craft. Logos means a saying or an expression. This is basically what stonemasons do all day. York Minster Fund, in an inspired process of looking to the future, employed Laura Cotter to research and develop the use of lime. Laura's job is to research and make connections across England, Europe, and much to my amazement, the whole of the world. To find technology which will best produce and conserve masonry at York Minster. To me, this is the conservation advocated by the Borough Charter, to research associated meanings of the place, to define significance and value, to give an informed understanding of how best to manage change. My professional life has already been enhanced by this process of engaging with technology. I've been fortunate enough to meet masons in Germany and live a dream of meeting masons in Milan, monks in America who send me emails asking advice about masonry, and whilst in return I respond by asking questions about technology. The visits have already managed to change at York Minster. In a talk about my visit to Milan, it was this slide on the right which gave the idea to Alex McClellan, the principal manager at the Minster, to build the new workshop with accommodation at York. As part of the process, we've already discovered two new materials that have helped us repair the Minster. Whilst a visit to Venice, a conservator named Paolo Pagnin introduced us to basalt, a material we now use to reinforce mortar repairs. Paolo in Venice showed us his work with basalt to reinforce mortar repairs and consolidate fractured stonework. The pins and mesh are made from extruded basalt rock. Basalt is stronger than steel whilst having the same thermal movement as limestone. The principal advantage of basalt is that it will not rust or expand like brass or steel armatures used in the past. This, I think, is one of my favourite materials. Whilst visiting London at a stone show, we found a material called Saint One. It's much against what many people would believe using the line method, but after a discussion with the master mason and architect, they said that is there any way that we can conserve these two stones or not replace them? Normally we would only replace a stone with about 15% of salt damage. Here you can see it's much beyond that, up to 75% of the stone is damaged. And basically we use the repair mortar to rebuild the surface. I particularly like it because you can give it to masons and craft people. You apply it wet, and at the wet stages you cut it back and you scribe lines on it, and it's very much similar to the traditional masonry method. And if we hadn't have used this, there would have been a lot of intervention to the stonework. And then often I get asked, what's your favourite piece of work on the Minster, thinking of all the stone carvings that I've carved in the past. I can honestly say it's this label stock. It was again where the master mason and the architect didn't want to move this stone because of its location structurally, and also it's the bottom of a hood mould. But basically all that had been lost was the face and the nose of the carving. And with modern materials, I was actually just allowed to play. So you can see on the different slides where I've used ceramic T-bars, stainless steel armatures, carbon fibre mesh, and then built it up with kime repair and then also Saint One. Might be much against the purist view of what we should do, but we've managed to save a medieval stone. Moving back to the question, why technology? Looking at the process of stonemason we employ at the Minster today, I can find little a medieval mason would recognise in our working processes. This especially in the design stage of the production of templates. Templates are geometrical outlines which are given to masons to produce a stone. This is a picture of the original setting out room in the Minster. The medieval masons used squares and dividers and inscribed their designs directly into the plaster floor before transferring them to stone. Since the Minster was completed in 1472, masons have been copying the original design, restoring the fabric. To do this, the master masons have devised ways of measuring the building to produce templates. The production of templates are developed from the 15th century plaster tracing floor through to the late 18th century wooden templates seen on the right, into the 1970s zinc templates in the middle, through to templates on the left the present master masons produce using CAD. Same principles and purposes, just different media. All informed by measurement of the original masonry. The laser scanner is a measuring tool which is accurate to 0.05 of a millimetre. This will record the condition of the stone far beyond photography. In this slide, we see a video of the Dancing Man capital in the Minster, which is decaying through salt damage. Much of the detail is not now contained within the salts. Normally, we would remove the salt, however, if cleaned, the detail would be removed. The traditional process would be to cast the capital. However, the stone is in such a poor state of decay, the casting process would probably remove the detail. To resolve this problem, the capital was scanned. Firstly, this gives a conservation record. So if we decide to clean the stone and salts occur again, another scan could be made and overlaid on the first scan. This will inform conservators of how the stone is decaying. Secondly, the laser scanner can be input into a CNC saw to produce a replica in the method Laura showed you earlier. Currently, I'm learning CAD and how to input the CNC, which will be installed in the Minster's new technology hub early next year. As part of the process, I've travelled to Abbey Masonry in South Wales, where me and my colleagues are learning to draw in CAD and input the saw. I found drawing with CAD is a fascinating creative process which gives an accurate rendering of three-dimensional space, which is beyond what can be achieved with wooden and zinc templates. What fascinates me is how we can use the saw like a mason, taking away waste material efficiently whilst leaving enough stone to be finished by hand in the traditional method. Perhaps more than anything, it's this slide, which shows a portal that the monks in America produced. The monks have not been trained in stonemasonry at all, but everything apart from the fixing process has been input by CNC saws and something called Z, laser brushing. As a stonemason, I felt like that I shouldn't like this. It was much against what my fellows would believe at the Minster, but I just couldn't help admiring it. I've often visited France and northern Spain, and it just reminded me of that fabric. And I think the principal question is, why would we not give the next generations of masonry this technology? At the beginning of this presentation, I talked about how I trained in the art and craft of stonemasonry and how important passing the experience on to the next generation is. I hope through the story of my life working at the Minster, I've helped you understand what a special place I have worked at and what a special life this place has given me. The Minster is constantly evolving and challenging itself. In the present, it's looking out to the world to share its knowledge and experience. When you think of the historic timeline, an original 14th century mason would not recognise the methods and materials that I use today. He would have never in his wildest dreams imagined travelling to Asia searching for technology. In turn, I can only imagine what methods the next generations of masons will use to conserve the Minster. The only thing that I'm sure of, the original design will remain, and the reflections of the original stone mirrors, which will be passed on to the future through technology and the art and craft of stonemasonry. This conserving York Minster as a place for past, present and future generations.